So what happens is they very quickly get booted off because of the marriage out rules and all that horrible history of the Indian Act with which you are all completely familiar, I'm sure. So the Powleys are directly descended to the historic community. They moved into the Indian community briefly and out again. Now, that's a story that is common all across the Métis Nation. We almost all have ancestors or cousins or brothers and sisters who married into the reserves, married out. In fact, some of the evidence that I think Dr. Tuff has shown is that some people move in and out of treaty 3 times within their lifetime or something. They'll take script, move into treaty, go off, go back in, go off. None of it affects your identity. It's about benefits. You can get some money, or you can get some land, or you can get health benefit or whatever. You take this, and then it doesn't work anymore, and there's an opportunity over here, so you take that. But what happened in the Powleys then, so what's happening is most people are focusing on the fact that the Powleys were once registered members under the Indian Act. And then they only want to look at that, and they only then want to say the Powley case is different from the Métis on the prairies, and therefore they're just a bunch of non-status Indians, and it's not a Métis case, and it's just a non-status Indian case, and they're all just about people who lost their status. And that's the way Powley is being diminished, and many times it's being diminished by our own Métis people. And I think that's really sad because, in fact, I think Powley is going to provide a test that will be usable all across the Métis Nation. Now, we've been to the Supreme Court already. We were there in March, and we argued. We don't have an answer yet. We don't expect one even at any time before the fall. But what I do expect will happen is that regardless of what the court finds about the Powleys themselves, and I'm pretty sure they'll find that there was a historic Métis community and that the Powleys are members of it and that they have a right, because there was no contradictory evidence. Like, there was nothing to say that they weren't or that it wasn't right. And the Crown indeed did not argue clear and palpable error at trial or at any of the other levels. So the facts stand. And but what's going to come out of this is who can exercise harvesting rights. What's the test for that? Now, when we went to the Supremes, everybody always knows that the big issue is the contact test, right? What are you going to do about the contact test? And for those of you who don't know, that's the test that the Supreme Court of Canada itself invented in Vanderpeet in order to try and establish the Aboriginal rights claimed by Indians. And they promised in Vanderpeet that they wouldn't hold that against the Métis when we got up there. And so I literally rubbed that in their nose right off the top of talking to them and said, you promised, and we're here relying on that promise that you said you wouldn't do that. Now, the Crowns all argued it, and it appeared to my eye that the court didn't like the argument at all. Crowns all tried to argue that the contact test precluded Métis from claiming Aboriginal rights, and the courts didn't like it. They didn't like it at all, and I don't think they're going to go there. Nor do I think they're going to go with the sovereignty test, because I think in their minds they've already wiped it out, and the only reason it has arisen again for discussion is because Mitchell was about crossing the border. And so they raised the issue of sovereignty because borders, of course, touch on sovereignty. Well, hunting a moose in Sault Ste. Marie doesn't touch on anybody's sovereignty. And when I said that to the court, Justice Binney and Justice McLaughlin kind of nodded at, okay, yeah, they agreed that this isn't about sovereignty. So I don't think the contact test is going to come out, and I don't think the sovereignty test is. So, okay, what is going to come out? We put forward a theory that we think would hold for the Métis Nation. By that, the Métis Nation that is already dealing with treaty. And what we said was this: the Crown's obligation to deal with Aboriginal people comes into play. It exists in the broad scope of things the minute the Aboriginal people and everybody are in the same area, but it really comes into play. Their obligations to actually do something come into play when they start to authorize the use of the land in a way that conflicts with Aboriginal people's use of the land. So in other words, if there's a trading post there from the Hudson Bay Company, that doesn't conflict with the way Métis use the land or the way Indians use the land, nor does a Jesuit mission. That doesn't, it might change their religion, but it doesn't change how they hunt and fish, right? So none of those things really change the people's life. But when they do things, as in Sault Ste. Marie, like issue mining leases, and mining companies start to move in, or they issue forestry leases, or they start surveying, as they did in Manitoba, or they start opening it up for homestead or letting people settle there, that's when they've got to sit down and deal with the Aboriginal peoples who are there. And that's what we say is the test that should be governing everybody. It makes sense. It's pragmatic, it's practical, it's on the ground. You don't have to deal with, okay, when was the assertion of sovereignty, because we can argue about that one till we're blue in the face. When was contact, because that's another one Dr. Ray really took on the contact test in the Powley case. So that's the theory we put forward to the Supreme Court about when the obligation to deal with them would come into play. We think it works for Métis who are sort of from, at least from Sault Ste. Marie West, because the Royal Proclamation had already come into play. The government knew about their obligations. They had implemented already. That's what they were doing in 1850, was following up on that exact obligation. And we're saying they should have dealt with the Métis too. Now, what you have to understand is that the Métis came forward as a separate group in Sault Ste. Marie asking to be included in the treaty. They wanted a special clause or their own separate negotiation. And that again is another marker of a people who are taking political action as a self-identified group to preserve their rights and their life and their land and their existence as a people, and clearly see themselves as different from the Indians because they approached politically as a group separately. Robinson didn't say, no, you don't have any rights, and no. He just said, I don't have a mandate to deal with you. I only have a mandate to deal with the chiefs. That's it. So what we're left with is, and all of you who know the Aboriginal rights test, is that Métis rights simply haven't been extinguished in that area. The Métis community, by the historical evidence, showed that it continued to exist. They continued to hunt. They continued to live their lifestyle in that area. They didn't all come under treaty, although some members did, but they didn't all, the community as a whole has never had its rights extinguished. So therefore, under Canadian law, they still exist. And that's what 3 courts to date have found.